well? If so, like,
No camera needed, so
the slides. Great. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I'm totally happy that it's easy for me. All
so
right, great.
let me introduce you briefly. So we will start. Is it okay?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Uh, Okay, my camera's on. Okay, on behalf of Mongolian Association of Securities Dealers, I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's session of our capital markets transfer, digital transformation, and sustainable development webinar series. So we are honored to have with us Mr. Mushtaq Kapasi, Managing Director and Chief Representative for Asia Pacific at the International Capital Market Association, known as ICMA. So Mr. Kapazia has played a leading role in advancing sustainable finance across Asia, from the development of green and social bond principles to promoting best practice in market transparency and cross-border investment flows. So today's theme, Capital Markets for Tomorrow, how sustainable finance markets are evolving in Asia can be more timely. So Mongolia has recently adopted its green taxonomy and is working toward deeper alignment with international ESG standards. So Mr. Kapasi's insights on how sustainable finance is shaping regional markets will provide us with valuable lessons as we build stronger foundations for Mongolia's own capital market development. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Mushtaq Kapasi. Okay, thank you. Kapasi.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this very generous introduction. So my name is Mushtaq Kapasi. I am from the International Capital Market Association, and I'm very honored to be able to speak to you today about the sustainable bond markets where ICMA is most active. If there is some chance for questions to be asked, I'm not sure if I can see the chat, but if there is any way for questions to be asked, then I very much encourage lots of questions, lots of comments. That actually helps me a lot to understand how we can serve the markets better and how ICMA can play a more positive role in helping to finance the, uh, the investments that are needed to combat climate change and to save the planet. So I will try to take about maybe 30 to 40 minutes. If I go a little bit over, please forgive me. And I do want to leave some time for further discussion, especially if anyone has any technical questions or any kind of comments for me. But overall, this is just going to be my standard presentation. And if you have any further questions that you're not able to address in this presentation and in this session today, or if you would like to get in touch later, then I absolutely encourage you to contact me directly. You can probably track me down on LinkedIn or through ICMA or through MASD. We've been a great partner for us over the last several years, actually, but even more closely over the last year or two. And one more thing I want to mention that I'm very happy about is I'm going to be visiting Ulaanbaatar for the first time in my life in next month in a few weeks for the Asia Securities Forum, which is a conference that's being organized by Mongolia this year. And so I may be able to see some of you actually in person, but I'm very much looking forward to seeing your beautiful country and uh, I hope I get some free time where I don't have to be talking about securities markets and can enjoy the rest of the experience. Okay, enough of that. Let's get into the presentation. Could you please go to the next slide? Okay, just a brief introduction of ICMA. Some of you may know who we are, but just to clarify exactly what our role is in the market. So we are an association. We're a nonprofit entity based in Switzerland. So officially we're a nonprofit, but we're a nonprofit like the Red Cross or like an industry body or like the Mongolian Securities Dealers Association. We are international in nature. So we started out in Europe, but now we have an office in Asia Pacific that is I've been running for the last 12 years. And we have over 600 members of ICMA. Members are not individuals, rather they are institutions that are involved in the bond markets. So we're not just about sustainable finance. Historically, we have been a trade association that helps set market practice, that helps introduce standard documentation, that helps advise on regulatory reforms. So we do a little bit of lobbying as well on regulation that affects the overall bond markets. One function that we've been doing a lot more of lately is in terms of education and technical assistance to markets that are still growing and that are still developing their capital markets, their bond markets. So we hold workshops, we hold technical sessions, we have panel discussions and so forth. And we really like to help facilitate growing the bond markets in a way that is beneficial for everybody, not just capitalism for capitalist's sake, but in a way that really affects and benefits the overall population. So in terms of ICMA's work, I'm based in Hong Kong. I cover the primary markets, which is debt issuance practices, secondary markets, repo and collateral markets is a big part of what ICMA does. But now, of course, our practice in sustainable finance is much more than it used to be with the green bond principles and all of the related guidance that has been in existence for over 10 years now. So this presentation will focus on sustainable finance work that we do, but I just want to make sure that you all are aware that ICMA's work is much broader, not just in terms of sustainable finance and the green bond principles. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so this is the general slide that we have about the growth of the sustainable bond markets. And the reason I show this is not just to show that the volume of sustainable bonds is growing, which is true, but also to highlight some of the limitations of this kind of data. So first of all, I think it's important to note that even though the outstanding bonds of sustainable finance are more than 5 trillion US dollars now, this is still a small proportion of the overall size of the bond markets, which, according to the most reliable estimates, is more than 140 trillion. So you divide 5 into 140 trillion, and that's less than 5% of the overall of the overall global bond markets is dedicated and labeled as sustainable. So that shows that there is still a tremendous opportunity to grow the market. And it also shows that we have a lot to do. We have an obligation to grow the market even more. Also considering that much of the financing in the overall global bond markets is not only not sustainable, but it's also of fossil fuels. It's of extractive industries. It's of companies that are actively harming the environment, right? So I hate to say it, but it's true. So in some ways, it's not just that the rest of the financing in the bond market is neutral for the planet. Some of it is actually detrimental. And so we
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Hello.
Now
Hi,
I can
everyone.
hear you.
I
Hi.
don't know what happened. Oh, great. Thank you so much. And very sorry, I don't know what happened, but somehow I lost the connection. So thank you all very much for your patience. Okay. Well, let's keep going. I just wanted to make one more point, which was that the total outstanding bond issuance is still not necessarily representative of the amount of interest and the amount of work that's being done in sustainable finance within organizations. So just because a company doesn't issue a green bond, doesn't issue a social bond, doesn't issue a sustainability linked bond, you can still be very much involved in sustainable finance. You can still be putting together a transition plan. You can still be changing your supply chain in order to make it more sustainable. You can still be revising your capital expenditure to make it more green. You can still be measuring your carbon footprint in a better way and reporting that to your investors and to your stakeholders. So it's not only the amount of bonds that are issued that shows the influence and the role of sustainable finance now. We're seeing sustainable finance influential in much more deep ways within companies all across the world now. So I want to leave with a little bit more of a positive note. One final point that I'll make about the sustainable bonds is that according to ICMA research, even though you see that a very small proportion, less than 5% of overall bonds in the market are labeled sustainable, if you take the universe of bonds issued by Asian issuers in currencies, foreign currencies, and issuing them outside of their home jurisdiction. So, for example, a Mongolian company that would issue a bond in US dollars and issue that around the world, that kind of a bond, an international bond issuance. If you take the international bond issuance across Asia, more than 20% of that was labeled as sustainable, right? Compared to 5% of overall bond market. So that's very interesting. And what that means is that for international investors looking to invest in Asian companies in the bond market, sustainable finance is very attractive. And for Asian companies that are looking to attract international investors through the cross-border bond markets, sustainable finance is also very attractive. So there's also a commercial reason, I think, from the issuer point of view, from the company point of view in Mongolia and in Asia, a good reason to issue sustainable bonds, which is to attract many more international investors than you might get from a normal vanilla bond. Okay, next slide, please. This is just showing a little bit more about the ASEAN markets. And the one thing I wanted to point out here is if you look at the issuance amount of sustainable bonds in the markets from 2023 to 2024, you look at those two bar charts, those two bars, you see the amount is relatively similar. The decrease is probably more due to the overall reduction in bonds as well as some of the anti-ESG backlash. But what you do see is you see a transformation where the green part is lowered and the purple part is increased. And that purple part is transition bonds. And transition bonds are mainly being driven out of the Japanese market, where you are seeing labeled transition bonds due to the efforts of the Japanese government to promote this market. So we see this as a growth market. We do see a trend, especially in Asia and some other emerging markets, for there to be more acceptance of transition as a type of bond and more acceptance of transition finance in general, right? It's not just about whether something is green or not green. It's not black and white. It's not green and brown. There is a middle ground here where we can go from not very green and transform our businesses over time and make investments that may not be absolutely green from the beginning, but are helping to reduce emissions and reduce the carbon footprint. So this is a major trend that we're seeing, and I think it's very important for Mongolia as well, because many of the industries that are important in Mongolia and some other countries in Asia, of course, are generally not inherently positive for the environment, but can be made more green, and that's extremely important. Okay, next slide, please. All right. Now, I'm going to get into a little bit of terminology. So, um, I think it's very important to understand what people are talking about when they talk about green bonds, social bonds, sustainability linked bonds. These terms actually have very careful definitions. So these are not vague terms. These are very well defined terms. And the way they're defined is through the principles. So what the principles are these are general um, guidelines for when a bond in the market can be labeled a green bond, when it can be called a social bond, when it can be called a sustainability bond or a sustainability linked bond. The idea here is that we want to protect these words, right? We don't want a company to go out and say we're issuing a green bond where it's not really green or it's not really sustainable or it doesn't really have the protections. So what the industry has done over the last few years, and this started about 10 years ago, is the major industry players got together with ICMA as the organizing body, the secretariat, to sit down and say, okay, how are we going to define what the minimum guidelines are for what can legitimately be called a green bond? And so the result of that is the green bond principles. And you can go on our website, and you can do it right now, actually. Go Google green bond principles, and you can download the green bond principles. They're not very long. It'll take you 10 minutes to read. There's also more extensive guidance that will take you longer to read and probably longer to study. But I very much encourage you to just go right now or go after this call and get the green bond principles, get the social bond principles, and just have a quick read of them so you understand exactly what the minimum guidelines are for how these work. Now, over time, we've had more and more different kinds of guidance, but the core ones are the green bond principles, the social bond principles, the sustainability bond guidelines, and the sustainability linked bond principles. And one important idea that I'd like to make sure you understand is that there are actually two types of bonds here, two types of structures here. The original green bonds are based on a use of proceeds approach. So what that means is whether or not something is a green bond, okay, it's almost purely a function of what you're using the money for, right? If you are borrowing money through a bond offering and you're using it to invest in green, sustainable investments, then that's pretty much a green bond. And to be able to label your bond a green bond, you actually have to follow some other safeguards, not just to spend the money on green projects, which is the most important thing, but also you have to have a process for how you're going to decide on where that money goes, because you may not know where that money is going all at the beginning. You have to have a process for project evaluation and selection. Then you also have to have a way to manage those proceeds. So either you have to take those proceeds that are allocated to green investments, put them aside in another legal structure, or allocate them or account for them in a ledger. You have to somehow know where that money is going. And then you have to make sure that you have transparency both on where the money is going, but also on the impact of those investments. How much are those investments affecting the environment? What is the benefit of those? How much are they reducing emissions, for example? But you can measure it in other ways. If it's investments to increase biodiversity, investments to clean water, for example. There may be other measures that are not related necessarily to carbon footprint, but you have to be able to disclose that to investors. If you can do all of those things, if you promise to do all of those things, then you have a legitimate green bond. So those are called use of proceeds bonds. And social bonds are exactly the same as green bonds, except that unlike green bonds, where the money is going towards green investments, for social bonds, the money is going towards social investments. So social investments can be things like hospitals, education, helping to alleviate the downsides of unemployment, helping refugees that have been affected by war, helping women in leadership and enterprise. All these kinds of socially beneficial projects and investments can qualify as legitimate investments under social bond principles. But if you are issuing a social bond, it has these same kinds of core components. The process for project evaluation and selection, the management of proceeds, and reporting. And also, it's important that you get an external review. That means you have an external body that is reviewing the bond to make sure that it complies with these principles and that the use of proceeds is legitimate. So these are the traditional kinds of bonds that are called sustainable bonds, the use of proceeds bonds. And then there's something called sustainability bonds, which is just a hybrid of green and social. That means that the use of proceeds can be both green and social. So we see quite a lot of these in Asia as well, where the issuer is issuing a bond, getting proceeds in, and using them for both green and social purposes. Now, the sustainability linked bond is a completely different structure. Okay, so it's still a sustainable bond, it's still under the general category, but here the proceeds can be used for anything. They can be used for general corporate purposes. The difference, though, is in the economics of the bond. For green and social bonds, even though the use of proceeds is restricted, the economics of the bond is still the same as all the bonds that we're normally used to. Right? There's a fixed coupon, it doesn't change, you get your principal at the end. A sustainability linked bond has the economics that can change based on a sustainability measure. So a very simple example would be that an issuer would issue a bond and they would have some sort of a target on how much they're going to reduce their carbon emissions, right? We're going to reduce our carbon emissions by 20% in 2 years. If they're able to do that, then everything is fine. If they're not able to do that, if after 2 years you measure it and they haven't reduced their carbon by 20% by their goal, then they would have a penalty. They would have to pay extra in terms of coupon or in terms of some sort of payment um, to investors. And so that gives them an incentive to improve their overall corporate sustainability, their overall corporate carbon footprint. So again, this is an important difference between the green bonds and the sustainability linked bonds. The green bonds have very normal bond economics, but the proceeds have to be used for specifically for green purposes or social purposes. In a sustainability linked bond, the proceeds can be used for anything, but the economics can change based on whether or not you meet a sustainability target. Okay, so I'll go to the next slide, please. I hope that's clear, but if not, then please read it again. Now, I'm just showing you this slide to give you an idea of all of the different types of resources that ICMA now offers in terms of sustainable finance. So the core of what we do, the basic thing of what we do, and if you only have 10 minutes, I really encourage you again to read the Green Bond Principles. But if you have time and you're curious, over the last 10 years since the Green Bond Principles have been issued, ICMA, with the help and cooperation of our members and all of the different participants in the market, have produced a large variety of different types of guidance for the market. So the most important are the product standards. That's the basis for everything that we do. And that's really what governs the credibility of the overall market. In addition to that, though, we've issued some complementary thematic guidance, which is talking about how different themes in sustainability can be incorporated into sustainable type instruments and the overall debt capital markets. So in particular, last year, we just put out guidance on earlier this year, we put out guidance on sustainable bonds for nature. So this is how to think about things like biodiversity, reforestation, nature-based projects, and how you can incorporate that into green bonds. What are some of the metrics that you use? What are some of the projects that can be used for green bonds in this theme? In the past, we've published guidance on things like blue bonds. Right? These are bonds where the proceeds are used for investments that benefit the oceans, or bonds to bridge the gender gap. So these would be social bonds, where the proceeds can be used for investments to benefit women or benefit businesses that are helping women or owned by women. Then we also have guidance on transition finance, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But this is more talking about how issuers can develop transition plans to make them more credible in the overall sustainable finance market. Next, we've also issued a lot of technical guidance. So, excuse me. I don't want to say that ICMA is the most technical of all of these organizations. So we really encourage you to go to other service providers, other NGOs that have done all sorts of amazing work to help with the technical aspects of issuing a bond. But ICMA has done some work to give certain guidance on external reviewers. What are some of the basic principles to make external reviews more credible and more free of conflicts, more technically accurate in the market? Quite a lot of what we've done is on impact reporting. This has been extremely important, especially to investors, making sure that investors have a sense of how much the bonds are actually helping the environment. And then we've also done some wider debt capital market guidance, which is more, I would say, like thought pieces on how green finance can be involved in Islamic finance, for example, how we can use SLBs in the high yield space, sustainable commercial paper, and repo. But I think it's fair to say that in terms of commercial paper and repo and sustainability, the use of those for sustainable finance has been relatively limited. On the other hand, though, we've seen quite a lot of green and social sukuk and Islamic finance in the market. And just to be clear, if this is of interest to you in Mongolia, the green social bond principles are absolutely adaptable and very friendly towards Islamic style structures in this market. Okay, next slide, please. Now you wonder, okay, we have these green bond principles, so how much are they actually used? Well, I'm very happy to say that the green bond principles actually underlie almost all of the sustainable bonds that are labeled as such in the market. Um, the green bond principle. Why are they so successful? Well, part of the one in the market to consult on these and to make sure that we have a wide selection of stakeholders that are advising on the green and social bond principles and the related guidance to make sure that it works for everybody. What I'm trying to say is, if everyone doesn't agree on it, then we don't try to impose it on everyone. So we try to make it acceptable to everybody, and that takes a lot of work. But I think that work is really worthwhile because then we get a set of guidelines that is acceptable and used across the market. The other point, and this is extremely important, and I want to really emphasize this to you in the audience, we want to make sure that if it doesn't work for a particular jurisdiction, that you tell us, right? We want to make sure that it works for everyone. So if you have ideas for how to make the green bond principles better, if you have ideas on how perhaps it's not working so well, if you have ideas on other kinds of guidance that we should be putting out to make the market more credible, to make it more transparent, to make it more robust, then please tell us. It's extremely important that we have that feedback. If we don't, then the principles won't be good for everybody, right? So we want to make sure that it's acceptable to all the participants and all the potential participants in the market. To be very clear, these principles are not something that myself and my colleagues and people from ICMA and a couple of big banks are putting together in a dark room somewhere, right? It's not a theoretical exercise. It's really the product of a lot of discussions, a lot of working groups, a lot of committees, a lot of debates, a lot of forums, a lot of commentary, and we want to include you in that, right? So we're delighted at the work that you've done on the Mongolian taxonomy. We really want to improve and facilitate more issuance of sustainable bonds in the Mongolian market. And so it's very important that we hear about the problems that you might be having or the suggestions that you have to improve or where you think the principles could be better and how they can improve. And only then will we continue to have these kind of numbers in the high 90s for the acceptance of the principles worldwide. Okay, next slide, please. Now, I promised you before that I would talk a bit more about the transition finance guidance that we have at ICMA. Now, one thing just to make clear is that you've seen that we have green bonds, you've seen that we have social bonds, you've seen that we have sustainability-linked bonds. We have transition guidance, but we do not have anything called the transition bond principles. Why is that? Well, there are a couple of reasons, at least two reasons, and I would say maybe the main two are as follows. One is that we try as much to minimize the number of principles, the number of guidance. We don't want to make things too complicated, right? We want to make the market as simple as possible. And we also, the more kinds of standards that we have in the market, the more kind of potential confusion there is. And already, you might be confused by some of these. So we don't want to make that any worse. Um, and when it comes to things like blue bonds, gender bonds, orange bonds, um, there's actually been suggestions in the market to have different principles, but we've resisted that generally as a community because we know that the green bond principles already work to incorporate um, blue and and social bonds already work to incorporate gender themes, for example, right? So we don't need to invent new principles, new sub principles. These other themes can already be possible under the existing frameworks that we have. So that's one reason. The second reason is, frankly, that transition has been controversial, right? Not everyone agrees with it. Not everyone likes it. There are many important constituents in the global markets that are quite strict about what can be qualified as green, and they are very worried about uh, bonds that might say they're green, but are actually still furthering fossil fuel industries, or that might be locking in coal or locking in mines or continuing the use of um, non-green technologies and non-green industries for longer than they should be used. Right. So, in other words, they're not green enough, right? And there's a fear that transition might just be delaying the climate transition instead of being more aggressive and more urgency behind the changes. So that is a worry, and that's a debate that's happening in the market. And so, for that reason, I think there is not 100% acceptance of transition. Now, having said that, we do realize something, which is that if we are going to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, if we are going to encourage transition, then we have to allow companies that are still not completely green to issue green bonds, right? We still have to allow companies that are on the path, but that are not completely there yet, to be in sustainable finance. Otherwise, there just won't be enough sustainable finance. If we say that you have to be completely green already to issue a green bond, then that's really going to restrict the number of issuers that can actually issue green bonds. And that's going to discourage investment in sustainable investments and in renewables. So what we want to do is we want to encourage more investment. And so we don't want to discourage issuers who aren't quite there yet. So what do we do? Well, we say that if you are an issuer and you are on the way to transition, if you are working on it, if you've got a really good transition plan, if you're already investing in making your economy, your operations more green, then that's great. Then we encourage you to do that. You have credibility in the market. Then we want you to issue in the market. And but the only requirement though is, or the main, it's not only, it's not simple, but the requirement is that you actually have to have a very good transition plan, and you have to be on the way towards making yourself as a company better. So that's the whole idea. I know it's a bit long-winded, but that's the whole idea behind the guidance for climate transition themed bonds. This is guidance for the issuer at the issuer level to have a really great transition plan to show the market, to show the world that yes, we are serious about transition. Yes, we have a plan that is relevant to our operations. Yes, it's science-based. Yes, here's the disclosure, here's the details about it. And yes, we are actually going to put our money where our plan is. Here are the changes that we're going to do to our capital expenditure plan. Here's how we're going to change the money that's involved in our operational expenditures. And here's how it's directly related to our transition plan. And then, even on top of that, what we encourage is an external review to show that even there's a third party objective observer that's looking at your transition plan and reviewing it and satisfied that it is a good transition plan. If you can do all that, and we believe that most companies are dedicated to doing that, then that gives you a lot of credibility in the sustainable market, even if you are not entirely green at this current stage. Excuse me. Next slide, please. Great. Now, Just want to go over some of the updates that we've had in 2025. So, the green bond principles, we have a very important update to the green bond principles, which is related to transition, but not the same as talking about the transition plans. What it's called is financing green enabling projects through green bonds. Now, I'll give you a little secret. This is not called transition, but it's really kind of transition. And this is just would say it's a bit of a compromise, right? Yeah. I mentioned before that not everyone in the market likes the word transition. They're a little scared of transition. So this is a way to incorporate some aspects of transition without really calling it transition, to be fair. And it's a way to incorporate certain aspects of transition within the existing green bond framework, which is a bit more elegant. So how does this work? Well, all this does in a nutshell is it creates extra categories of use of proceeds under the green bond principles that might be legitimate use of proceeds for green bonds. So right now, under the original green bonds, you have things like wind power, solar, clean water, reforestation, biodiversity, right? All of these things are your traditional use of proceeds for green bonds. Nobody has any problems with these. Then you have other categories that are definitely not green, right? That are not accepted as green bond use of proceeds. Things like coal-related technologies, things like fossil fuel reduction, things like industrial, heavy industrial usage. Even if it's becoming a little bit more green, if it's furthering a brown industry, then it can't be green. It can't be used as green. Can't be used as the proceeds under a green bond. But there's a middle ground. What about projects like mining for minerals that are used in electric batteries, right? What about things like a smart grid? So this is erecting infrastructure that is not necessarily green, but it is going to facilitate a reduction in energy usage. Or what about a project like making chemicals for insulation for green buildings, right? So again, the chemical industry is not green. Um, Chemical factories are not very environmentally friendly. But if you're doing that to facilitate a green project, then it falls somewhere in between, right? And if you can show that what your activity is actually going to lead to a greener outcome, then maybe we should be encouraging that. So that's the idea behind the green enabling projects, right? They're not specifically transition, but they are sort of in between, right? They're not absolutely green, but what ICMA has come out with as a compromise is if you can show, so you need extra disclosure. If you can convince us that this mining or this chemical industry or this this electrical infrastructure is going to lead to a project that is reducing emissions, then and in a very convincing way, in a very transparent way, then you can use this as a proceeds under green bonds. So that's the idea of green enabling projects. So again, if you're interested in this, then and I think it's relevant to you, please read the guidance. Just go to our website or Google that, and you can download it for free and read it. We also have an example checklist, which is a spreadsheet with a number of different use cases, including the ones I've described, and a statement. Oh, and sorry, this last one is a little bit of a silly one. Not silly, but it's a little bit of a kind of off the grid one, so to speak. This was coming out of Europe, and we gave a little bit of guidance on the eligibility of defense projects for green and sustainable bonds. The short answer here is that you cannot use green bond principles or social bonds for war or for weapons, but social bonds can be used to help those that have been affected negatively by war or conflict. So if you're helping refugees, if you're helping to feed and house displaced populations that have been affected by wars or conflicts, then that can be a legitimate and a positive use of social bond proceeds. This actually came out of some of the politics, I think, in Europe, where Europe had been very focused on sustainable finance. And then over the last few months, they've been much more focused on defense. And so they were wondering, well, can defense in some way be sustainable? Um, I understand the question, but the answer generally is no. All right, next slide, please. Now, the nature theme bonds, again, feel free, you've got the QR code, you can download this. This one I'll just mention very briefly. It's just talking about the use of proceeds from green bonds to finance nature-themed investments. And again, these are not necessarily about emissions or about carbon or about reducing the, 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 the protecting the atmosphere, so to speak. It's much more about overall nature kind of themes. So, in its particular, forestation and biodiversity, I think are the big ones here. These can be very positive, and they can have a very positive impact. But I think the challenge here is to make sure that you're defining them in a way that is very transparent, that is understandable, and also how do you actually talk about the impact of these? How do you talk about the positive impact of these? So this guidance gives a little bit of detail and a little bit of color on how you might be able to do that, and also how you might be able to use these for sustainability linked bonds. So I encourage you to read this in case it might be of interest to you. And because it's quite new, we'd be very interested in your feedback on nature bonds. Next slide, please. One more theme, this is going a little bit more big picture, but one more theme that we're interested in at ICMA, and I'm very happy to hear your thoughts on this or hear your contributions, is the interaction between fintech and sustainable finance. So ICMA, we also have a quite active work stream working on fintech. We don't do everything in fintech, so don't ask us about cryptocurrencies, don't ask us about cybersecurity, things like that. But we are looking at how technology is affecting the bond markets, and that has many different aspects to it. So most directly, we're looking at models for digital bonds. So these are bonds that are issued on the blockchain using distributed ledger technology, and how these might be affecting the overall infrastructure and some of the regulatory considerations behind these, how these might be affecting the markets and what some of the benefits of them might be. So that's the core of what we're doing in our fintech practice. But we're also looking at the effect of AI on bond markets. And we're looking at the potential use cases and benefits of technology for sustainable finance as well. So as you can see here, we see some applications for technology in terms of the issuance of sustainable bonds, in terms of reporting, in terms of compliance, and in terms of some of the life cycle events of sustainable linked bonds. There are a lot of different applications of technology to sustainable bonds, coming from just the issuance itself of the bonds, but also especially in terms of gathering data, analyzing data, reporting data, making sense of data, allocating risk, looking at climate risk as well from both the issuer and the investor perspective. Many, many different types of use cases. And if you're interested in that, then please follow up with me, and I can share some more information and examples with you. But we're also looking for ideas from you, from Mongolia as well, because a lot of the innovation is coming out of Asia. So we're very happy to hear your ideas on how technology can help to improve this space. Next slide, please. Oh, that's it. So thank you very much. That is the end of my presentation. If you have any further questions or comments or ideas, you may please feel free to email me directly there. The general email for any kind of questions about the Green Bond Principles or ICMA's work is this Green Bonds email, so you can feel free to direct any questions that you may have there as well. We also encourage all of you to join the Green Bond Principles community. So that's a club, it's an association involved in updating, involved in all the debates and the technical work around the Green Bond Principles. The principles we operate, it's not free for most people. So if you are a nonprofit organization or a government organization, the principles are free to join. However, if you are a commercial organization, then you will probably have to pay a fee, which is for a very small organization that's not involved in the bond markets. It's about 3,000 US dollars. If you are a major financial institution that is active across the bond markets, then it's more like 15,000 US dollars. Not cheap, I know, for many of you, but especially if you are a small organization that's interested in being active in sustainable bond market from a commercial perspective, or if you are a nonprofit organization, then we'd very much welcome you to join, and it should be reasonable for you to do so if you're active. But otherwise, you don't have to join the actual organization to contact me or to speak with us. I'm very happy to engage and to have conversations with anyone who's interested in our work. And again, I will be in Ulaanbaatar in mid-September, I think from the 12th through the 14th, I believe, something like that of September. And so I'd be very happy to meet any of you if you're able to, if you have time and interest to meet me during my time in Mongolia. Well, thank you very much. That's all the time I will take for now. I believe we have a few more minutes for question and answer if you'd like to ask. Otherwise, I wish you all a very pleasant day and a pleasant weekend. Thank you. Okay, sure. Thank you for the question. So, generally, what advice would you give to Mongolia as a new player in sustainable finance? Wow, okay, that's a very big question. Okay, so yeah, I do have a few things. So, first of all, I would encourage all of you, if to the extent possible, just to learn about sustainable finance, right? So, this is already a great first step. And I would encourage all of you to read as much as possible the types of documents that we have, right? So learn about the principles, learn about the guidance, the impact reporting guidance, and so forth. We have papers also on taxonomies. We have a paper on transition finance. These are interesting thought pieces, and then think critically about them, right? So what I mean by that is don't just read them and say, oh, this is what is accepted in the world and we should follow this. No, 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 no. You only follow it if you think it's right. We are not imposing, this is everything that we do at ICMA is a result of all the markets contributing, right? So if you think something is not working, if you think something is outdated, if you think ICMA is wrong, if you think our consensus is not correct, if you think it just doesn't work for Mongolia, right, then tell us and tell us why it's not working. And this is very important feedback. Now, we may not be able to change it overnight, but I can tell you that Asia has been influential, especially Japan, especially China, and to some extent Singapore, Hong Kong as well, Australia. All of these jurisdictions have been influential in the global conversation. So that I think would be the first step. The second step would be to join the principles to the extent you can. So just so you're able to get all the information, available. One other actually very specific piece of advice I would give you, because you're not far, is that we have our annual general principle, our annual general conference of the principles, which is in Japan, in Tokyo, in November. And let me put it in the chat. Because if any of you can travel um, to Japan in November, then that would be a wonderful place where you can meet all of the leaders in the market, right? And all of the people at ICMA, like my colleagues who do this day in and day out, and ask the questions, talk to investors, ask about what they're interested in, bounce ideas, share your brainstorms. Just a second. Let me get this. Oh, okay. I'm going to post this right away. So yeah, so I've just put this in the chat, so everyone can feel free to look at this. And also, you can also attend live stream as well. So even if you're not able to attend in person in Tokyo, I very much encourage you to attend this conference to learn what the state of the art is for sustainable finance. Okay, so next question. How can ICMA work more closely with associations like MASD to build capacity and credibility in emerging markets such as Mongolia? So, look, this seminar is a great first step. I even have an idea. Even next month, I'll be in Mongolia. So, if it's useful for me to give a similar presentation in person for MASD or for any of your clients, I'm more than happy to do that. I know we have a full schedule with the Asia Securities Forum, but I'm more than happy to make time while I'm there. So that's something that I can do. Also, we at ICMA, we have a very good network. So if if there are specific topics that you would like to talk about where maybe we at ICMA are not the best, or maybe I'm not the best personally, right? We know a lot of the experts globally, and we can bring together the right people in a webinar or in a bilateral call, to give some of these conversations. And I think in my experience, it's really a combination. But I think it's very important to have the in person contacts and the in-person interaction. I think that's really magical. It's not enough just to have this kind of virtual presentation. Although this kind of virtual presentation can also be very effective, and in a way, this is very important as well because it gets a wider audience in probably the most effective way. But then also, I think it's equally effective and equally important to have very honest bilateral conversations. So just to have the one-on-one conversations where people are very honest about some of the issues, some of the problems. And I'm not going to pretend that all this is very easy, right? Sometimes it can be very challenging. Sometimes it can be very hard. There are a lot of barriers, and it's important to be able to talk honestly about those. So we have a combination of these types of communications that I think is quite important. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you again for sharing your insights today. Also, there's one thing that I'm interested. It might be big in general question too, sorry.
Sure. I don't mind.
About the sustainability linked bonds, many Mongolian companies are mining and energy sector. So, for example, coal and copper producers are looking for ways to transition toward cleaner operations. So, from your experience, do you think sustainability linked bonds could work well for such companies? And could you maybe, if there's a case or example from another country that Mongolia could learn from, could you please share briefly?
Sure, sure. So um, they can work pretty well, and there have been. I'm not aware of a an SLB by a coal company, although I maybe not be the best right person to ask. I may just be missing them. I know that they have been done by energy companies, so by electricity companies, by energy companies. I know that they have been done in the past by those types of companies. Um, so there is some precedent. I'm not sure about mining, and I'm not sure about pure coal companies. The tricky part though is so, but I think that the general answer is yes, and I think that it could be quite welcome in the market. But the challenge is finding the right level of ambition for the targets, and finding the right level of changes in the coupon, say if the targets are not met. So for that, I think the absolutely crucial thing is to talk with your bankers and to talk with your potential investors, right? So have that conversation very early on. So if you are a company that's interested in doing that, I would go speak with whoever your debt capital markets coverage people are at your bank. I'm sure you have bankers who would love to talk to you and do business with you. So you ask them, you say, look, I'm interested in a sustainable fund, linked bond. Can you get me in touch with some investors and talk about what their views are and what the adequate uh, what the right targets would be. Now, some investors may say, okay, we're not going to get involved in that because it's related to coal. But I think that's not everybody. And I think there are a lot of investors out there, especially in Asia, that would be quite interested in this, especially maybe like Japanese investors, for example. Um, so, but the real difficult and important part is getting those levels right. right? If you say, okay, we're going to reduce our coal production by 50%, that might just be too ambitious, right? And then you won't meet the target, and then you'll be kind of set up for failure. On the other hand, if you say, "Oh, we're going to reduce it by 3%," well, maybe that's what you're supposed to do anyway, under your transition plan. And so you're not really doing anything extra by issuing the sustainability-linked bond, right? So investors will not be that impressed, and it will be accused of greenwashing, right? Because you'll be doing something that you would have done anyway. So it's very important to get that kind of level of ambition correct. And the only way to do that is to just have direct conversations with the market to see what the investors find acceptable. But I think in theory it could work.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for.
Here's another question, if you don't mind. From your experience, what would you recommend for issuers in smaller or frontier markets like Mongolia when issuing green bonds so they're more acceptable, also attractive to international investors? Yeah, sure. So similar answer, actually. I think the main thing is to talk with your investors, right? That's really the main thing, and that's when you get the best information. So think about who you want as investors. Um, think about, if your investors are only domestic, that's a different question, right? Then I think, um, it may not be as difficult, right? And especially if you have some kind of anchor investors that are already, happy with you or know you very well. But if you're talking about expanding your investor base, more broadly in the world, and getting new investors that you haven't had before that are interested in you because you're issuing a green bond, then I think you just have to speak with the investors. So that's one. But related to that is also measurement and disclosure, right? So the international investors, what they really want to know is they want to, because if they don't know you very well, they want to be able to have comfort that you are actually committed to your plan, that you're committed to reducing your carbon footprint or your environmental impact. So it's very important to develop the ability to measure and to disclose all of your kind of environmental metrics. And that's not easy, especially if you've never done it before. Even we at ICMA, we try to do this. We try to measure our scope 1, 2, 3 emissions and so forth. It's really hard. It's really, really hard. So I'm not underestimating the amount of work, but that's what's actually quite important. And so to do that, you actually have to develop that expertise in house, but also, talk with your accountants, talk with your consultants, and talk with your bankers. So I know it sounds simplistic, but really the main advice I would give is just speak with your potential investors. All right. Any other questions?
Okay, there seems to be none.
No?
So,
Okay.
so we truly appreciate your time. These points are super valuable for Mongolia as we develop our own green sustainable finance market. And we also issue an enjoyable stay in Mongolia during the upcoming ASF event. And we hope you have a wonderful time here with us. And I even might be guiding you to department store if there's a time.
Okay, okay. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you so much. Really
Okay.
appreciate it. And I hope to meet many of you in person soon. Thank you again for your interest and for your attention.
Thank you.
All right. Goodbye. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.